Harold's voice had that fake zen calm right before he delivered a gut punch. "We're moving you off the acquisition project," he said, not looking up from his espresso machine. To make room for Brandon, I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just felt every vein in my neck harden like a cable. 3 years. 3 damn years I'd spent cleaning up the sludge of this company, fixing the books, auditing the vendors, hand-walking our mess of a code base into something a buyer might actually touch without a hazmat suit. And now I was getting benched. For his son. Brandon. A man whose most impressive contribution to the company thus far had been screwing up a coffee order so badly we had to call IT to reset the smart machine. "It's a mentorship opportunity," Harold added, like he was offering me a gift, not spitting on my resume. "You've done such great foundational work. Now it's time for Brandon to learn the ropes. Legacy stuff." Ah, there it was, legacy, I nodded slowly. The way women nod in meetings where men misunderstand the word collaboration as compliance. I even smiled. Harold smiled back, completely unaware that my silence was not agreement, it was a crime scene photo. My legacy? The $600 million acquisition I'd built from the bones of this dying company. That was now some nepotism crash course for trust fund larva with a haircut you could set your watch to? I walked back to my office, heels echoing like gunshots down the glass corridor. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed the door and started organizing my files, not for handover, just for insurance. And hey, while I've got your ears, if you're the kind of person who hates when talent gets stomped out by smug mediocrity, maybe give this channel a little love. Hit that like button, tap subscribe. 90% of you are listening without hitting it, and trust me, it helps the team more than Brandon helps any spreadsheet he touches. Now, back to the bloodbath. By lunchtime, the news had spread. Brandon was taking over the acquisition project. Suddenly, my calendar was an empty desert of canceled invites and polite non-responses. People looked at me like I was already gone. But the thing is, I wasn't, not really. I did what they didn't expect. I complied. I attended the transition meetings, handed over sanitized versions of key documents, watched Brandon fumble through project plans he clearly didn't read, and I smiled through all of it like I'd just discovered inner peace at a yoga retreat, instead of being stabbed in the back by a man who couldn't spell due diligence without a deck. "You've really set us up well," Brandon said one afternoon, flipping through a report I personally compiled over 8 months. "All I have to do now is execute." He winked. He actually winked. Like we were co-conspirators instead of me being the sacrificial lamb on his LinkedIn glow-up. I nodded again, smiled, made a note in my journal that simply read, "Execute indeed." What Brandon didn't know, and what Harold hadn't bothered remembering, was that the buyer had required a very specific escrow protocol for the source code, one that I personally negotiated, architected, and signed off on, one that, quite literally, ran through a single hardware token, one that still sat in the zippered pouch of my laptop bag. No one had asked for it, no one even mentioned it. They were so busy high-fiving Brandon's fake leadership that they forgot who held the fuse. I spent the rest of the week playing the good soldier, updating handover docs, smiling in meetings, answering questions like a seasoned consultant instead of the person who built this machine from the ground up. I even trained Brandon's assistant on how to request updates from legal. But I didn't hand over everything. Not the access logs, not the final M in a checklist, and certainly not the token. Because while Brandon was preparing for a photo op, I was preparing for a moment. One they wouldn't see coming. One that would remind them, in front of every lawyer, auditor, billion-dollar buyer in the room, who the real legacy was. And I promise you, it wasn't Harold's son. I waited until 7:12 p.m., well after the office thinned out and the startup bros with their kombucha breath had slithered home, to unlock the archive folder no one else seemed to remember existed. It sat on a mirrored drive, nested beneath 6 innocuous layers named things like Vendor Temp Archive, Old Final V3. The kind of folder only the person who created it would ever dare open again. That person was me. Inside, the escrow protocol, PDF copies of the buyer's technical requirements, my notes from the calls, the final signed custody agreement, and the implementation schema for the offsite source code: storage, encrypted, version locked, triple redundant. The buyer's exact words had been, "We want zero risk of contamination or post-transfer tampering. Can you guarantee that?" And I had. I built the guarantee with my own 2 hands, down to the hardware key that made it possible. There, in the checklist labeled Security Flowchart V2 Executed, was the line most people would have skimmed: token authentication required for vault decryption. Custodian identity must match registry signature. No override protocol permitted without breach of legal chain. In plainer terms, if you didn't have the token and weren't listed as its registered custodian, you could stare at that vault all day and it wouldn't crack for you. Like trying to start a car without the keys and the steering wheel registered to someone else. I scrolled down to the registry form. Custodian, Melissa J. Carter, date 04/03/2023, secondary custodian, none assigned override chain authorized parties, none authorized. I stared at my name for a long moment. not out of vanity, out of calculation. There had been a moment back then when we were early in talks with the buyer, where Harold had tried to shove Brandon into the room during a Zoom call. He'd said something absurd like, "My son's going to take point on this technical stuff soon. Probably best to start looping him in." The buyer's legal lead had blinked, then just said, "We prefer to keep current technical chain of command intact for the time being." Harold dropped it. Brandon wandered off, and I never added a secondary custodian. It wasn't a trap, not then. It was just practical, cleaner, safer. But now it was the difference between that code being a $600 million asset or an inert brick of scrambled data nobody could validate. I stood, walked to the back cabinet, and slid open the top drawer where I kept my external drives, expired badges, and things I never trusted to cloud storage. The token was there, small, gray, unremarkable unless you knew exactly what it could do or what it could prevent. I turned it over in my palm, the ridged edges pressing small moons into my skin. Not even the CTO had asked about it. The CFO, God bless him, had signed every one of my forms without reading past the first paragraph. His signature was on the escrow doc. His initials were on the audit log. But his brain, it was usually somewhere between golf and whatever his fantasy football team was doing that week. And Brandon, please, if that man even knew what physical key meant, he probably assumed it was something you pressed on a keyboard. I slid the token into a velvet pouch, then into the inner pocket of my laptop bag, tucked between my charger and a half-eaten granola bar I'd been too busy to finish since April. Back at my desk, I deleted my access history for the archive folder. Set up a rule to forward any queries about the protocol to legal with a subject line that read, "Per confidentiality, please consult project custodian of record." I wasn't paranoid. I was precise. There's a difference. I sat back in my chair, arms folded. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead like some kind of bad omen in a movie. But I didn't feel doomed. I felt still. The kind of stillness you get right before the first drop of a roller coaster. Not fear, not dread, just inevitability. The calm of a system waiting to be triggered. They thought I'd stepped down. They thought I'd bowed out. But in the vault behind this company's most valuable asset was a door they couldn't even see, and behind that door there was only one name that mattered. Mine. Brandon's first big leadership moment came 3 days after I was officially iced out. Harold sent a chirpy email with the subject line, "Exciting new direction, Brandon to lead acquisition talks direct hit." The emoji alone made me want to disassociate. Beneath it, a calendar invite, internal prep review deal deck walkthrough. I clicked maybe, and then showed up anyway. I needed to see the damage up close. The conference room was packed. Finance, legal, engineering leads, everyone who mattered. Brandon strutted in like a man who'd just discovered Microsoft Teams and thought he invented it. He wore one of those company-branded polos they hand out at trade shows. Too tight, too smug. "All right, team," he said, clapping once like a high school football coach about to ruin someone's ACL. "Let's win this thing." He fired up his deck. Something with a title like Path to Victory, Strategic Synergy and Scalable Outcomes. Slide 1 was a logo animation that looked like it had been made by someone with a fiver addiction and a traumatic relationship with PowerPoint transitions. Then came the data. Except it wasn't data. It was vibes, graphs without sources, revenue projections pulled from the land of wishful thinking. At one point, he literally said, "Our ARR will probably double post-acquisition because of, downstream vertical absorption." I watched legal twitch. Then he misquoted our burn rate by nearly $4 million. Claimed the buyer initiated the deal because of our breakout user metrics when in reality, we'd been quietly shopping ourselves for 18 months, and the buyer only bit after 3 rounds of bespoke integration modeling, modeled by yours truly. But Brandon's real talent wasn't lying, it was believing the lie the second it left his mouth. Like he genuinely thought he was the architect of a deal I'd built line by line, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, over the course of 2 fiscal years and a bout of seasonal depression. Then came the slide that made me grip my coffee mug so hard I nearly cracked the ceramic. Deal structure breakdown as proposed by strategic lead. The diagram was mine. The color coding, the waterfall flow, the annotated terms, all mine. I had presented that exact visual 2 months ago to the internal M and a committee. Only difference now? My name was gone, replaced with a big fat header, Lead, Brandon Carter. I took a long sip of coffee and stared at the screen like I was watching a true crime documentary starring the guy currently breathing my oxygen. He fumbled a few more slides, confused pre-money and post-money valuations, used capitalization table like it was a synonym for vibe check, and when a junior analyst from the buyer's side gently asked about audit trails for vendor liabilities, Brandon launched into a condescending rant about empowering agile solutions, which didn't even pretend to answer the question. She went quiet. I saw the look on her face. I'd worn that same look once at my first job, when a senior manager patted me on the head in front of the CIO and called me detail-oriented in an adorable way. That analyst would remember this moment, just like I remembered mine. And when it came time for the buyer to vote on personnel retention post-acquisition, I had a feeling she'd have some very sharp thoughts. The rest of the room shifted in their chairs like people who just realized they'd locked themselves inside a clown car. Brandon, oblivious, closed the deck with a flourish and said, "This is what leadership looks like." Then he smiled at me, like we were in this together. I smiled back, like I didn't already know the ending of this particular horror movie. The applause was generous, forced, the kind people give when they're trying not to offend the boss's kid. A few polite questions followed, none of them about the deal structure. No one dared poke holes, not yet. I walked past him on the way out and he said, "Great having you in there. Hope you learned a thing or two." I said nothing, because if I opened my mouth, I might not stop. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and added a post-it note to the one I'd started keeping under my keyboard. A simple list titled, "Moments That Matter Later." Under item #12, clause 9.4 missing from revised doc, I wrote #13. Brandon takes credit for my deal deck. Buyer analysts visibly uncomfortable. No one corrects him. And then I underlined it, twice. I wasn't mad. Mad was too small a word. This was something else, something colder. The kind of quiet fury that doesn't yell or shake, it waits. And then it burns. It started as a whisper, a line buried in an email thread with 20 names CC'd. "Can you confirm the current status of the escrow validation process?" We didn't see confirmation logs attached to Brandon's packet. I read it 3 times, then closed my laptop and stared at the wall for a full minute. They'd noticed. The buyer's team, quietly competent, infuriatingly thorough, had moved past Brandon's glittery fluff and started poking at the bones. And it turns out the bones weren't there. The next day, a new thread popped up. Subject, compliance cross-check, source vault credentials. Same buyer lead, this time more direct. Please provide documentation of credential chain, decryption authority, and access log since initial handshake. Escrow chain must reflect active custodianship. Translation: someone on their side had pulled the escrow agreement, seen clause 9.4, and started connecting dots. Or rather, noticing which dots were missing. Brandon responded with vague boilerplate. "We're in the process of migrating those files to a new shared structure. My team's on it." His team consisted of a guy named Ethan who once stapled a PDF to a printed out Excel file and called it integration. If Ethan was on it, we were doomed. A few hours later, I got a Slack message from Susan in legal. "Hey, random, do you still have the original vault access log? Just for backup, Brandon said you didn't complete the full handoff." Super casual, no worries if not there it was. The pivot. "And we're so grateful for your foundational work to hey, maybe it's your fault this house has no foundation." I didn't respond immediately. I took my time, ate lunch, ran a test backup on my personal drive, then forwarded a 2-sentence email, attached, final signed access log, chain complete, and chain of custody declaration, custodian, Melissa J. Carter. Please advise if any further clarification is needed. Attached was the original PDF, time-stamped, notarized, signed by the CFO, me, and the external compliance officer. No commentary, no explanation. No hope this helps, or please let me know, just cold facts, served neat. Susan replied 30 minutes later, "Got it, thanks." That was the last I heard from legal. But not the last anyone heard about the vault. The buyer's security team escalated. Meetings that used to be warm and friendly became tight-lipped and clinical. Their questions grew more surgical. Who currently holds physical custody of the decryption key? When was the last successful verification test conducted? Has Brandon Carter completed custodial security clearance? Harold replied once and only once, "Brandon has full authority." That was a lie, a provable one, because I still had the key, and Brandon had never passed the clearance check required to even request access. By Thursday, whispers became posture. I overheard the CTO whispering outside the glass conference room, voice low and shaky, "They're going to walk. If they don't get confidence in our data chain, they'll tank the offer." This isn't a toy deal. Inside, Brandon was trying to charm a buyer's analyst with a story about how he once met the governor's cousin at a wine tasting. I sipped my coffee and added to my list. #14. Buyer requests vault log. Brandon blames missing files on Melissa's incomplete handover. #15. Legal confirms chain of custody, my name only. #16. CTO sweating bullets. Auditor watching everything. It was spreading. That quiet, sickly tension that creeps into a company's bloodstream when leadership starts tripping over their own cover stories. When the new guy blames the veteran, and the veteran doesn't bite back, but just sends proof. And when that proof starts making its way into rooms with people who sign checks. Still, I said nothing. I didn't refute Brandon's lie publicly. Didn't corner Harold with my paper trail. I didn't need to. They were already standing in their own smoke, and the fire hadn't even started. The file wouldn't open. Brandon clicked the icon again, and again, then mashed his keyboard like a toddler playing Office. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, now red in the face and sweating through his department store button-down. "The vault's supposed to open with my credentials." IT leaned over his shoulder, unbothered. "That's not how it works." I was across the room, ostensibly there for transition support, watching the scene unfold through the slats of my barely raised laptop screen. Brandon jabbed at the trackpad. I am the deal lead, I should have access. The IT rep, Sam, who'd been with us longer than the furniture, shrugged. Doesn't matter. Vault credentials are tied to the hardware token. You don't have the token. Brandon frowned. What token? Sam blinked. The one Melissa registered for escrow. There's only one. Brandon's jaw opened, then closed like a sea bass trying to form a thought. He looked at Harold, who had wandered in mid-chaos carrying a fresh latte and an old assumption that his last name still solved problems. I thought we fixed this, Harold said. Sam didn't even look up. Nothing to fix. Token's still active. Custodian's name is in the registry. Vault won't open without it. But I'm in charge now, Brandon insisted, gesturing with both hands like the vault might be voice-activated by entitlement. She's not even on the team anymore. Sam gave the corporate version of a smirk. Yeah, well, the system doesn't know that. That's when Harold turned to the CTO. Can we override it? The room got very quiet. CTO Dan, man who usually spoke in LinkedIn buzzwords and ego puffs, suddenly looked very interested in the pattern of his tie. Dan, Harold pressed, can you override it? Dan finally met his gaze, not without violating the chain of custody protocol, which the buyer's team explicitly required in the term sheet. Harold scoffed. Then just don't tell them. It's internal. Dan gave him a look. The kind that says I am not dying on this hill for your spawn. It's logged, Harold. Every override triggers a record. They'll know. They already asked for verification trails. If we do it without the custodian's consent, we violate Clause 9.4, nullify the escrow conditions, and give them a contractual off-ramp. Translation, one wrong move and the buyer could walk away clean. No penalties, no deal, no $600 million salvation. Brandon looked like he was about to cry. So what? What do we do? Everyone looked at me. But I kept my eyes on my screen, scrolling casually through an old quarterly report. I sipped my coffee, lukewarm now but still delicious when paired with the slow unraveling of hubris. Harold cleared his throat. Melissa, we need access. I didn't flinch, didn't smile. Just glanced up like I was mildly surprised to hear my name in a room where I no longer existed. Oh, I said. He forced a chuckle. There's been some kind of mix-up with the system. Just a technical hiccup. Could you, help Brandon get access? Sure, I said brightly. Just send a formal request to legal noting the chain of custody transfer, include the buyer's written approval, and once it's signed and countersigned, I'll initiate the handoff. I didn't blink as I said it because there would be no such approval, and Harold knew it. Clause 9.4 had teeth. The buyer's legal team had insisted on that escrow protocol after a competitor of ours was caught faking their audit trail. Now they wanted one name, one token, one point of failure. It was risk management wrapped in steel cable. Harold went quiet. The CFO, who'd been fiddling with his watch the whole time, finally spoke. We're running out of road here. If they ask for another chain validation and we can't produce it, we will produce it, Harold snapped. Just need a little time. But time was the one thing they no longer had. The next buyer meeting was in 36 hours, and if they showed up without the escrow logs verified, the entire acquisition could vaporize like Brandon's credibility. Later that evening, I caught Brandon in the hall, pacing and muttering to himself. When he saw me, he froze. This isn't how it's supposed to go. I shrugged. Then maybe you should have read the manual. He started to speak, but I walked right past him, calm, quiet, and carrying the most valuable object in the building. A token no one remembered to take away, but they would remember now. The email arrived with a cheery subject line that reeked of delusion. Updated deal packet, final internal draft. Rocket, I clicked it. Slowly. The way you open a drawer labeled Snake Pit just to confirm your suspicions. Inside was the revised term sheet, the updated compliance flow, and the deal summary Brandon's team had supposedly streamlined for clarity. I skimmed the cover letter. Brandon had signed it. So had the CFO legal, and for reasons I could only assume involved recreational self-harm, the CTO. I didn't need to read the whole thing. I just hit Control plus F. Typed, Clause 9.4, no results found. I sat back in my chair, not shocked, just impressed at how brazen stupidity had evolved into strategic malpractice. Clause 9.4 had been my one non-negotiable. It laid out the source code escrow protocol in exacting detail. Custodian identity, hardware token requirement, chain of custody, no override permitted without written consent from the buyer, termination triggers upon unauthorized access attempts. In other words, the backbone of data integrity that had made this company even remotely acquirable. And now it was just gone. Brandon's team had removed it. Maybe they thought it was redundant. Maybe someone told them it would spook the buyer. Maybe Brandon just didn't understand what it meant and deleted it because it had too many legal words. Or maybe, and this was the most likely, they thought removing it would magically remove me. I opened the original deal document I'd saved 6 months ago. Side by side, I compared them, paragraph by paragraph. It was like watching someone defuse a bomb by yanking out wires labeled "Do Not Touch." I didn't panic. I didn't email legal. I didn't forward the doc with a passive-aggressive subject line like "Noticed a teensy omission eyes." Instead, I opened my personal Gmail. Attached the original, signed version of the deal structure. Highlighted clause 9.4. Typed 3 words to my legal contact. Let's begin logging. Hit send. Then I stood up, walked to my bookshelf, pulled down the old cardboard file box I'd been using as a footrest for 2 years. It still had the label from my first week, Melissa Old Invoices, 2019 to 2020. Underneath the faded folder tabs and forgotten receipts was a velvet pouch. Inside that, the token, smooth, matte gray, kind of object that doesn't look dangerous until it decides it's the only thing standing between order and collapse. I placed it gently in the box. Next to it, I added 2 printed documents, the original escrow protocol with my name signed in blue ink, a notarized scan of the buyer's vault approval form with my initials next to custodian of record. Then I added one last thing, a handwritten note that simply read, if opened, notify counsel immediately. The box wasn't heavy, but it felt like a lit fuse. I didn't leave, not yet. I sat back down at my desk, calm as a loaded gun in a drawer. Let them keep revising. Let them think they were rewriting the script. Because what Brandon didn't know and what Harold would soon learn is that deleting a clause doesn't delete the system it protects. You can rip out the page, but the lock still holds. And I still have the key. She arrived precisely at 9 o'clock a.m. No fanfare, no small talk, just a worn leather briefcase, a controlled gait, and eyes like open ledgers. Angela Park, the buyer's lead auditor. I'd met her once back when the deal was still in diapers. She'd grilled me for 4 hours on access logs, vendor overlap, and the technical escrow arrangement. No coffee breaks, no tangents. She wasn't there to be charmed, entertained, or reassured. She was there to verify. Harold greeted her at the front with that game show host smile he always wore when someone more intelligent entered the room. Angela, welcome back. We're so close to the finish line now. She nodded once. We'll see. The rest of us, Brandon, the CTO, the CFO, and me, invited as a process continuity observer, filed into the large conference room. It was glass-walled, fluorescently lit, and colder than usual. Not physically, just atmospherically. Angela sat at the head of the table, cracked open her laptop, and pulled out a hard copy of the revised deal packet. Brandon slid into the seat across from her, all fake confidence and startup swagger, cracking his knuckles like it was a poker game. Before we proceed with cap table verification and final valuation factors, she said, eyes on her screen, we'll need to walk through escrow validation. There was a pause, a subtle tightening in the room, like someone had just said turbulence mid-flight. Brandon coughed into his fist. Right, yep, we're migrating those systems right now. Everything's in motion. Angela didn't look up. That's not what we requested. Well, he tried again. We've modernized a few of the workflows. The old system Melissa set up, it was great, really thorough, but we've streamlined it, restructured the access pathways. She held up a hand. Just 2 fingers, and Brandon shut up. She scrolled once more. Said, I'd like to see the full chain of custody for the source code escrow, including custodial logs, active token registry, and any overrides requested or executed since last quarter. The CTO shifted in his seat. Brandon glanced at Harold, who nodded at him like that would somehow insert confidence into his bloodstream. Brandon turned back. We don't have the full log printed, but I can summarize. Angela raised an eyebrow. Brandon corrected, still consolidating the access points. There were a few handover delays when, Melissa transitioned off the project. Silence. Angela set her laptop aside, opened a manila folder, pulled out a printout with a small label on the bottom, escrow authorization record original signature. She slid it across the table. This is the only registered custodian in our file. No amendments, no secondary entries. Brandon leaned forward, looked at the document. Melissa, 04/03/2023, he blinked. Well, yeah, but no chain transfer? Angela asked, calm but sharpened. He looked at Harold. Harold cleared his throat. We, made some internal adjustments. We didn't think formal reassignment was necessary since Melissa's still on staff, technically. Angela turned her head, slowly, so you altered the protocol without informing us. Harold tried to laugh. Altered? No, we just evolved it. Angela looked at Dan, the CTO. Did you file a reauthentication request for custodial shift? Dan froze. No. Did you log any override attempts? No, he whispered. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands. Then the escrow vault remains under the sole authority of Melissa Carter, and any access attempts made without her registered approval are in direct breach of Section 14.3 and Clause 9.4. Harold's face turned the shade of a retirement fund hemorrhaging overnight. Brandon looked like he was about to be sent to summer camp on Rikers Island. Angela pulled a smaller document from her briefcase. We'll pause valuation proceedings until validation is resolved. Further engagement is contingent on verified escrow control. Then she turned to me. Just for a moment, I didn't move, didn't smile, but I met her eyes. She nodded once, tiny, almost imperceptible, and then began packing up. Brandon opened his mouth. Angela shut her case with a click. The sound echoed louder than any word he could have spoken. The room smelled like victory cologne and stale desperation. You could tell who was wearing which. Harold had picked the walnut-paneled executive conference room for the final due diligence meeting, a space no one used unless they were trying to impress or lie. He sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, face stretched into a smirk that didn't quite fit anymore. Brandon, positioned right beside him like a discount consigliere, was practically vibrating with self-satisfaction. He'd worn his best blazer, the one he called Boardroom blue, and had rehearsed his intro 3 times in the hallway. I know because I heard him. They invited me as a courtesy, the kind of word that tastes like poison if you say it too often. I accepted. Not because I wanted to be polite, because some curtains you want to be front row for when they fall. The buyer's team entered quietly. No pleasantries, no jokes, just clipped nods and notepads. Angela, their auditor, took the same seat she'd used during her first visit. Same posture, same stillness. Only difference was the air pressure, thick now, like the oxygen had been filtered through tension. Harold opened with a monologue. Naturally, we're thrilled to be at this stage. The integration has been seamless. Brandon here has really stepped up to lead with clarity and precision. Frankly, I've never been more confident in our future. Brandon chimed in. It's been an honor to continue the strong foundation Melissa built. He glanced at me. She really paved the way. I said nothing, just nodded like someone who's finished reading the will. CFO cleared his throat and leaned toward Brandon. All systems go, he whispered, barely audible. We're ready. Brandon sat straighter, looked around the room like he was accepting an invisible trophy. Well then, let's finalize escrow validation and close this thing. Angela didn't move, just looked at the buyer's counsel, who looked at the CTO, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Let's begin with protocol confirmation, the buyer's counsel said. Chain of custody, escrow token, vault logs. Brandon turned to the projector and clicked to the slide labeled Updated Access Workflow. It was a flowchart that led nowhere. Boxes pointing to other boxes. No names, no timestamps, just graphic design trying to pass for governance. We've updated the structure to simplify access, he explained, voice smooth like overripe fruit. It's all integrated now, cleaner, leaner. Angela blinked once. Names on the token registry? Brandon hesitated. CFO jumped in. We believe the registry was in the process of being transitioned. No documentation reflects that, Angela replied. Well, Brandon started, then faltered. Across the room, silence spread like ink in water. Heavy, irreversible. That's when I moved. No words, no signal, just the sound of my laptop closing, slow, final, deliberate. Click, every head turned. Even Harold's. I reached down, unzipped my bag, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, like I was peeling back the last layer of a lie. Inside the box. Inside the box, the token. I didn't take it out, not yet. I just let them hear the sound of velvet fabric shifting against plastic. Quiet, heavy with implication. Angela looked at the bag, then at me. Brandon's mouth parted. CFO leaned back like he'd just seen the last card on the river. Harold narrowed his eyes. What are you doing? He asked, voice clipped. I looked up, calm as still water. Just here as a courtesy, remember? Angela's lips pressed together. Her pen tapped once against the edge of her notebook. The buyer's counsel began to sit forward. I let my fingers rest on the pouch inside the box. Nothing flashy, just gravity and the weight of the truth about to be pulled into daylight. And still, I said nothing. Because when the bomb is already ticking, you don't need to shout. You just wait for the silence to break. I reached into the box. No hesitation, no pause for drama, just precision. Kind you earn through years of being overlooked and underestimated. My fingers closed around the token. Small, cold, waited like it knew what it was about to do. And then without a word, I lifted it. Up and into the light, palm open, wrist steady. Gray plastic, one blinking LED, the heartbeat of a $600 million secret. The room stopped breathing. Angela froze mid-pen stroke. Her eyes locked onto the object like it was a detonator. In a way, it was. Harold leaned forward slowly, voice low and confused. Melissa, what the hell is that? But Angela already knew. Her voice cut through him. Is that? CFO turned to look, blinked once, twice. His jaw worked silently like a man trying to swallow a confession. Angela finished her own sentence, barely above a whisper. That's not the escrow key, is it? I met her gaze. Calm, centered. Clause 9.4 still applies, I said. The source code vault is protected under the original custodial chain. That key, I nodded toward the screen Brandon had just clicked away from, is irrelevant. Silence, and then the faint hum of panic charging the air. Brandon stood. No, wait, this isn't. She's not even on the team anymore. I was told the registry was never updated, I said, still not raising my voice. No formal transfer, no buyer consent, no override filed. So unless this room wants to breach federal compliance and open itself up to litigation, I suggest we all remember what signatures actually mean. Angela looked to the buyer's legal rep. He'd gone still, posture military, hands folded in front of him. Harold erupted. This is sabotage. I turned to him. No, this is governance. Brandon's voice cracked. She's doing this to tank the deal. Angela replied, eyes still on me. No, she's doing exactly what we asked. Custodial control, verified protocol, legal chain intact. Harold stood, finger pointing at the box like it might explode. You don't have authority anymore. I shrugged. You don't get to decide that. Your buyer does. And as far as they're concerned, I nodded to Angela. The only name that matters is still mine. The CFO buried his face in his hands. Oh God, he muttered. We're in breach. Angela turned to the buyer's rep, who was now staring at the token like it held the last honest contract left on Earth. "Let's step out," he said quietly. He didn't look at Harold, didn't look at Brandon. He looked at me. Angela stood. Her chair barely scraped the floor. The rest of her team followed. Brandon stammered something, didn't matter what. Harold was red-faced and sputtering about unprofessionalism and insubordination. The CTO stared into the middle distance like he was watching his retirement float out the window. I packed the token back into the box, sealed it with 2 fingers, closed my laptop. Smooth, silent. Angela paused at the door and turned to me. "Will you be available for a separate meeting?" I nodded. "Anytime." They left. The glass door swung shut behind them like the last gavel in a trial that never needed a judge. And then I was alone in a room full of men who had just realized what it feels like to bet the house and forget who holds the deed. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit him.